Welcome back to the Teske Brief. My name's Stephen Teske, retired judge, and this is episode 7, and it's titled The Second Barron Moment. Now, in the last episode, we talked about Bivens' actions, what they are, why the Supreme Court has retreated from them, and why, as a matter of constitutional structure, the court says this problem belongs to Congress. That was the law. Today, we talk about what happens when Congress does nothing, because we've been here before. Now, let's talk about the first Barron moment, because there's actually two of them. And this is the beginning. It was in 1833. The Supreme Court decided Barron versus Baltimore. Now, John Barron was a fisherman. That was his livelihood. The city of Baltimore diverted waterways as part of a public works project and destroyed the harbor where he made his living. As I said, his livelihood was completely wiped out without compensation. So Barron sued, arguing that the Fifth Amendment required just compensation. That's what the Fifth Amendment says. But yet the Supreme Court said no. Not because what happened to Barron was fair, not because it wasn't harmful, but because at the time the Bill of Rights applied only to the federal government, not to the states. And technically it still does. It's just that the Supreme Court has used the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment to incorporate the Bill of Rights to be used against states. But the court's logic was legally sound, and the result was morally catastrophic. The Supreme Court didn't say what happened to Barron was acceptable. It said that's just not our problem, which is judicial code for someone else needs to fix this before it gets worse. So what happened next? Well, it wasn't immediate. Here's the part we often forget. The country didn't fix this overnight. Decades passed. Abuse spread. Injustice hardened into policy. It took a civil war, all right? It took Reconstruction after the Civil War. It took the 14th Amendment. And even then, states resisted. So Congress acted again, but this time with teeth, and passed what we now know as Section 1983, creating a federal civil cause of action against state officials who violated constitutional rights of its citizens. Barron didn't have it back then, but if he were still alive and that was happening, he would be able to file a lawsuit successfully using Section 1983. But this particular section exists because states couldn't be trusted to police themselves. Now, I want that to sink in for a moment. They couldn't police themselves. You see, Congress didn't wake up one day and say, hey, you know what we need? We need more lawsuits. No, they said enough damage has already been done. So why is this the second Barron moment? Now, let's fast forward to today then. Let's talk about the second Barron moment. Federal officers, particularly immigration agents, are engaged in routine street-level policing inside American cities. Roving patrols, going into houses with administrative warrants not signed by judges. They stop cars, they enter homes, right? They detain civilians, and they've used force. And now in Minneapolis, they've killed 2 people. Now, all that would still be litigated to determine if it was unlawful shooting, but that's our problem, right? They're federal officers, and that's what this episode is about, is that what do we do if you can't sue a federal officer because all you have is Section 1983, which only allows for suits against state actors? So yet, unlike state and local officers, federal officers operate inside a shrinking accountability vacuum. Section 1983 doesn't apply to them. So Bivens has been functionally neutered, right? I mean, the Supreme Court says, as I explained in the last episode, we're backing off of that. We shouldn't have created it in the first place. It was judicially created. It should have been created by Congress. We'll leave it at the Congress, okay? but qualified immunity remains intact, okay? But qualified immunity is only as good as Section 1983 civil suits against state actors. You can't bring them against federal actors. The Constitution binds both state and federal actors, right? But the remedies do not. There are remedies for state actors who violate the Constitution and one's civil rights, but not for federal. And that's kind of a problem that we're dealing with right now in Minneapolis, given the Renee Good shooting and Alex Preddy shooting, is that if the parents feel that it was a unlawful shooting and their civil rights were violated, okay, that is Renee Goods and Alex Preddy, then where do they go to hold those agents accountable, okay? If they were state, they could file a Section 1983 civil suit. Well, we created accountability rules for cops who write parking tickets, right? But not for federal agents carrying military-grade weapons in American neighborhoods. That's not a policy choice, folks. That's an oversight with consequences. So let's talk about the dangerous part that isn't just a law. It's a signal. It's a message. And here's where policy, not doctrine, becomes decisive. When federal officers know there is no realistic civil remedy to hold them accountable, when criminal investigations are discouraged or blocked, and when leadership tells them explicitly, you are immune. Look, I'm not kidding there. Recent reporting reveals that senior administration officials, including Stephen Miller, President Trump's special assistant, who is, the primary lead in handling immigration enforcement. Anyway, he and others have explicitly messaged federal agents that they are immune, literally, expressly has said, you're immune from legal consequences. Miller's directive wasn't just a legal opinion, folks. It was a culture shift. That doesn't just remove accountability, it changes behavior. If you tell someone they're immune, okay, stop investigating them and promote aggression. But yet don't act shocked when aggression increases, right? That's not human nature failing. That's management succeeding. Systems behave exactly the way they are designed to behave. And this system is now designed to reward aggression and punish restraint. Look, folks, this is not hypothetical. We're watching it unfold in real time. We have federal agents operating in dense urban environments, not at borders, not in remote areas, but on city streets. We have families with no civil remedy. We have states who denied evidence, okay? They've requested the feds for access to the evidence. No, you can't have it. We have federal leadership declaring before investigations even begin that nothing wrong occurred. And we have courts saying accurately, this is not ours to fix. If this feels familiar, it should. That's what Barron felt like in 1833 when the city of Baltimore ruined his livelihood. So here's history's warning. Every time this country has allowed power to operate without accountability, the result has been the same. Delay, denial, then damage. The lesson of the first Barron moment was not that courts failed. It was that waiting for the political branches to act cost lives. When power has no consequences, it doesn't become careful. It becomes confident. And confident power without accountability has a long, ugly history, one this country has already paid for once. Where does responsibility now lie? So let me be very clear. And this time, I'm not speaking as a retired judge. Congress cannot say it doesn't know. Congress cannot say it lacks authority. Congress cannot say this is someone else's problem. The Supreme Court has drawn the boundary, and on the other side of that boundary is legislative responsibility. So what comes next? You see, in the next episode, we move from diagnosis to prescription. we will talk about what legislative accountability for federal officers could look like, why parity with Section 1983 is not radical, it is overdue, and how Congress can act without undermining legitimate law enforcement. This is not about being anti-police. This is about being pro-Constitution, because rights without remedies are promises without meaning. And we have already learned the hard way what happens when we ignore that truth. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Teske Brief. Until the next episode, when we look at solutions, everyone, please take care and be safe.